Hey, be nice. Welcome back to another video on my channel. Today, I am making a YouTube video with Mooch, I guess, because she's being very clingy right now. So I apologize for any of her grunts or whatever that might get picked up on the mic. Hang on. Today, I wanted to talk about another subset of horror with you guys, and this one's going to be techno horror. It's one of my favorite little subgenres of horror to write in. A lot of my short stories are actually some variation of techno horror. So yeah, let me just talk to you guys about what it is and some examples, and maybe you'll think techno horror is pretty groovy too after this video. I don't know. But yeah, let's get into it. So techno horror. Really simply, it's basically any sort of horror story that has technology incorporated in some way. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish techno horror as its own thing because it tends to have a lot of overlap with sci-fi and fantasy. And traditionally, it's been done in a more like we have to warn about the evils of whatever technology exists or the corruption of certain technologies. And traditionally in American media, this is done in like a dystopian type setting. So when I was Googling examples of techno horror, it's kind of hard to find like a lot. But Night of the Living Dead was brought up as an example of like that dystopian type like techno horror. Again, it's hard because there's certain crossovers with the different genres. The type of techno horror that I tend to vibe with, or I tend to write a lot more, originally actually comes from Japan. And it is a techno horror that's more based on like supernatural entities utilizing the technology to carry out whatever dastardly deeds there are. So in this sort of techno horror, it's not necessarily the technology itself that's super scary, but it's like uh, whatever cultural threat or fear is already present, just coming to life again and updating itself with modern technology. So, as many of you know, and if you don't, Japan has a really rich cultural and history regarding like yokai, which are like sort of like their own cultural monsters and spirits. Um, that sort of spirituality is heavily present there. And so a lot of stories incorporate some sort of haunting or whatever through phones and technologies. The most famous one that actually has adapted itself, like there's an American adaptation too, is The Ring. I'm not really sure what it's called in Japanese, but The Ring was originally a Japanese story. The Ring was originally a Japanese story about the young girl who, and I guess she was like, the story got changed when it moved over to Western audiences. So originally the Japanese story, she had a different name, and she was somehow related to like a water sea deity as well or something. But in the US, it's the story of Samara, and she like was basically very neglected and abused, and she like if you watch the tape, she like eventually comes out of the TV and comes at you. And the background story of that movie is that like she was locked away and only had the VCR for companionship, which is why like she tends to haunt old videotapes and VCRs and like TVs and stuff. Yeah. I did a really poor job of explaining that movie, but it's very popular. And if you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch The Ring. Uh, it's like a little dated in terms of like the technology used, clearly, because who watches VHS anymore? But that's besides the point. I kind of jumped ahead, so that was the first example. So now you know that techno horror kind of like embodies those sorts of things. Um, previously, like a lot of, I guess maybe like previously a lot of zombie movies could fall under technical horror because people, especially in the 80s, were afraid of the consequences of using nuclear technology. So they created a lot of stories about the ramification of employing like nuclear power and stuff. So, you could argue that Fallout is kind of like a techno horror, but it's not specifically a horror. It's more of like a post-apocalyptic type story. So that's where shit gets hard. But I'm just going to give you a couple other examples besides The Ring to kind of help solidify what techno horror is. And the one I came up for me, it's a book and a movie, and I haven't seen it yet, even though it's like literally iconic. It's the Stepford Wives. So basically, in that story with the Stepford Wives, it is a story about the reactions to feminist movements back in like the 70s. So obviously it comes in with a woman. It starts off with a woman, and she's a photographer, and she's married, and she's uh, she wants to have this career for herself as well, but she moves in this town, and she notices that the other women in this town, who are previously very spirited and opinionated, and um, they're trying to achieve things for themselves as well. She notices that over time, a lot of them are becoming more docile and like domesticated, and she thinks like they're being poisoned or something initially, and she's trying to like figure this out. And plot twist for the ending, it turns out that these women are actually androids, or that are replacing wives, because the wives are getting, I guess, too rowdy. I don't know, but the husbands are deciding that they'd rather have their like domesticated partners, so they get androids that are basically just like exact lookalikes of their wives. So yeah, I know there's a new show out that's more of like a comedy. I think that pokes fun at this concept, and I think there's been other spin-offs that poke fun at this and like try to gender swap this thing. But the original story was a social critique of how men would respond to like this new feminist ideology or whatever. Um, so it sounds like something I would enjoy. So I plan on looking into this movie and book after the fact. Um, but yeah, I think that's one of the earliest distinct techno horror examples that I found. Okay, I also wanted to bring up this movie Unfriended, just because like I remember watching this quite a few years ago, and I thought it was like really fun, um, and scary, and it so again, another like trope I like in horror movies is like found footage. I'm a big fan of the Blair Witch Project, and I kind of like the interactivity is not the right word, but I like how personal it seems when it's shot that way. I think that's why the Paranormal Activity series did really well too, because it had some of that found footage feel to it. Um, and they incorporated certain technologies to make that movie work. But Unfriended is like that, where it's just like basically one big Skype call, and all of the murder stuff happens like while you're watching the Skype call. So you see different like split screens on the computer and stuff, and it's just really creative, like the methodology behind this movie. So I wanted to include it in the listings because like this was a current technology at this time, and when it came out, I think a lot of people celebrated it because it was more a creative way to do a storytelling, especially for a movie. Um, but yeah, so if you haven't seen Unfriended, check that out too. Um, I really like this movie. It might be a little bit dated, kind of like some of the other ones, but it is what it is. So I want to bring up probably one of the more recent examples of techno horror that I've seen, and this is Megan. So Megan is fantastic. It's like more of a horror comedy, I guess. But it kind of talks about how like it's very well done, and it's basically this computer programmer, I guess programmer engineer. She works for a toy company, and she starts making like smart toys, and the movie starts out with like a really bastardized version of like a Furby, and that being like an interactive toy. And but secretly she's working on like more of like an android doll type thing that is meant to be a companion for children. And not only is it like a companion, but also fills the role of like teacher as well, because they can like instantly Google things for kids when they ask their questions. So it's supposed to be like a lifelong friend thing, like a toy that can grow with you. And so that's what Megan is. Megan is the prototype to this, and Megan is given to her niece to play with when her when the parents of the niece pass away, like they died at the beginning of the movie, and so the aunt is taking charge of raising her. She clearly doesn't want to be a mother. She clearly doesn't care about any of that things. She is very inconvenienced by having to take care of her niece now. And you can kind of see that she's not an engaged parent at all, and kind of like shifts parenting responsibilities over to Megan, the android. Except Megan is gets more and more malevolent like as time goes on, and she starts to act out in violent ways, of course, because that's like what we do with like scary android AI stuff, right? Like we're like, oh, AI will get violent. which it does, like in this movie. That trope is there. So the android basically gets violent and under the guise of protectiveness. The android gets violent under the guise of protectiveness for the child, and a lot of havoc ensues. But it's interesting too because you see the child's emotional dependence on this thing and how the child herself starts to have outbursts when the toy is starting to be taken away. And when I was watching this, I kept thinking about like iPad kids and the behavioral issues that are coming about when kids spend too much time with like screens in their hands and stuff. I mean, fuck, I'm a grown adult, right? And sometimes even when I'm watching TV or if I'm on my phone for too long, it affects, I can feel it affecting my mental health or just like my physical health too. Like I feel so drained if like I binge watch something. So I can imagine what it does to a growing brain. Like I am not like a psychologist whatsoever, but like it cannot be good to just have your kid on iPads all day. And unfortunately, that seems to be a common occurrence with parenting these days. And again, I don't want to be super critical because I'm not a parent. And I know that being a parent is like super hard. And sometimes you just need a break. And so you'll plop a TV show on for them and let them like chill out. I get that, trust me. But again, we see that play out, and I think that's like the warning of the show is like having your children become too emotionally dependent on technology and not stepping up as like a parent to actually parent your child and relying on, I don't know, like YouTube or God knows what else to parent your children for you. Like that's crazy. So much so that like this is a whole topic for a separate video, but apparently there's like kids are having issues with their literacy rates in schools these days, like post pandemic. And some parents just really didn't step up the way they needed to during the pandemic. You know, granted, it was like a super stressful time, like, you know, people losing their jobs or having to try to figure out how to maintain their job and educate their kid at home at the same time. That's a lot of work, right? So I'm not downplaying that, but like reading attention or reading in general and literacy has declined since the pandemic, and there's lots of reasons for that that I don't necessarily need to get into right now. Um, but yeah, it's just interesting how this is coming about, and that's what thing I love about techno horror is because I do love the social commentary that's present with techno horror. Typically, one criticism of this genre is that it can very be technophobic. So some people think that this genre of horror is kind of like played out already and can be fear mongering to people who are already have some sort of like prejudice against technology. I know that like just even talking about AI, people have divisive opinions on it. Okay, bye. That people have divisive opinions on it. My husband works with AI quite a bit. Just as part of his job, he's a programmer, and they push for different applications and different. The clients he has try to push to incorporate AI in their applications that they order. So yeah, so we're pretty well versed with the possibilities and limitations of AI in our household and our discussion. I know I've made videos about AI before, and my opinion on it is that I do think that AI could be used for good things, especially like for instance, is helping people with like disabilities and stuff. So yeah, my basically, I think it can be used for assisting people who have certain disabilities, or you know, try and make their lives easier with like speech to text applications or things like that. But right now, AI is being used in a lot of scammy ways or like to steal intellectual property of creatives. So that's not great. But you know, it is what it is, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, that's Megan. That's kind of like what that talks about. And I think that's probably the most recent example of techno horror that does like the social critique. So I love Megan. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's kind of goofy, but I think it is the most camp version of techno horror that I've seen in a minute. Okay, and I would be foolish to not include my own techno horror book in here. Sorry, this is going to be a little bit of a self promo, but this is Cursed Images, Scary Stories from a Child of the Internet. So this came out, I don't know when Megan came out, but this came out a year ago in 2023. And I've been working on this for a minute, and it's basically just a short story collection. So Cursed Images is basically a collection of stories that all revolve around the toys and tech of the early 2000s. This was my childhood pretty much. And this was a time where technology was really being incorporated into our toys and like our daily lives. So like that's when it first started, right? Where technology was consistently in your face in some degree. So I mentioned Furbies before. There's a Furby story in here, but I've also talked about like Tamagotchis. Um, I talk about Webkins, if y'all remember what Webkins are, and I also talk about like a lot of creepy pasta vibes, and like texting. There's like a texting theme thing, and the sorts of like coded text language we used to use when that was first becoming a thing, or when cell phones were first becoming a thing, for interactive communication. Um, but oh, and there's a story about like Y2K in here and how everybody thought the world was going to end because of the data storage issues or the timekeeping issues that came with Y2K. But yeah, basically that's what this is. It's kind of like Twilight Zone meets like the teenage girl slumber party type thing. That's what I was going for. So this is techno horror. I'm not necessarily somebody who's like, technology is super scary. But what my goal with this was to take things that felt nostalgic to folks like me and give it like a really spooky sort of twist at the end. And again, this is horror, so it's like scary, but not super violent or graphic in my opinion. But it's spooky. It's what it is. Low key, I'm working on a sequel for this, but I don't want to say anything else at this time, because it's not like fully concrete just yet. But I am working on a sequel to this, which this is my best selling work, or my most consistent selling work, and so I'm hoping people love the sequel just as much as this one. But yeah, that's techno horror. I hope you learned something about techno horror. It's pretty basic and self-explanatory, actually. I mean, there's like even smaller subsections of techno horror called like digital horror, where again it's like horror that takes place in the digital space. So my book that I just showed you would fall under that. There's other short stories I've done that probably fall under that as well. I have short stories that are coming out that fall under techno horror too. So there's a book coming out on the 15th that is an anthology, where writers are writing about writing. It's called Writer's Retreat, and I have a story in there about an electronic diary, like those kinds we had, where it was like you had to say a password into the journal type thing. And then the other one I have that's coming out this year sometime. Honestly, I don't know when, but that one's coming out this year sometime, and it is about AI chatbots. So that I guess counts more as a digital horror too, because that's like strictly in an online space. But then its predecessor is like analog horror, right? So like analog horror is a subsection of techno horror where it's like, again, sort of like the found footage genre. And that has had a resurgence, I think, lately, because it feels nostalgic and like kind of cozy to people sometimes to see things played out on like a VHS, because it feels like a family home video, right? So if I were to do like a cozy horror, maybe I would lean into something like that, where it feels like you're watching a family videos of people or family footage, and it's like really scary. So yeah, there's different subgroups within techno horror you can just as easily expand on. I've given so many examples. One thing I didn't talk about was like even Poltergeist. Like Poltergeist technically is a techno horror because the girl gets sucked into the TV. There's a lot of TV interactions when it comes to horror, but I think it's natural. Like whenever there's new technology, there's always going to be backlash, and people have fears of the potential of what that could mean. Like, I mean, I'm even just thinking about like even when we cloned that sheep, uh, people freaked out about that and like the social implications of cloning. People can do that with like stem cells, I guess. But so it's like just technological advancements or scientific breakthroughs in general. There's always going to be people who push back against that. And like I said, some people are very critical of this genre because they don't want to give any legitimacy to people who are fearful of technology for no reason. And I understand that, but I also think that this is something that can really, really preserve like what is going on culturally in a society, like I talked about with like the Japanese techno horror, or even with Megan, right? Talking about current issues or current fears that come about with like unchecked technology. So yeah, I like this genre a lot, even if I'm not making a certain statement about the technology itself. It's still fun to incorporate that kind of stuff in your writing. I mean, I think it modernizes it Will it date in the future? Yeah, because if you're reading this 30 years from now and you're like, what the hell is a Furby? Like, it's not going to resonate anymore. But for the people of a certain time, it's going to really connect with them. So it's a great way to, it's a great mechanic to employ to connect with a certain audience. It's just maybe it won't hold up the same way like a traditional vampire would, because everybody knows what a vampire is, and vampires have been around for quite some time. And, nobody's not going to know what a vampire is, but they might not know what like an eye dog is, which again I would be very tempted to make an eye dog story, but I have no idea what to do with that right now. But anyway, I'm rambling. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it informative. If you like it, feel free to check out my other videos where I break down different subgenres of horror. I had one, my last one was just about cozy horror and what that means, what that is, and how some people are reacting to the word cozy and horror being mixed together. So if you want to check that out, you should. If you want to see more videos from me, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can also like this video, comment down below, let me know what you think, or if you have any other examples of techno horror, that'd be great. You can also share this video with a friend and get the word out about me and who I am and what I do. That would really help me out a lot. So just thank you for all this sorts of engagement. I really appreciate it. And until next time, thanks. Bye.